Community Engagement in Higher Education, a Vision for Policy and Practice by 2030. It is a pleasure, on behalf of UNESCO, to present our speaker, Mr. Thomas Farnell. Thomas is a higher education policy expert at the Institute for the Development of Education in Zagreb, in Croatia. His main areas of interest are how universities can better respond to societal needs and address educational inequalities. He is currently leading a project developing a European framework for community engagement in higher education. He is a member of NESET, the European Commission's network of experts on the social dimension of education and training, and is the author of 2 recent European Commission reports on community engagement in higher education, dated 2020, and on the impact of COVID-19 on higher education, dated 2021. Thomas, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of you for coming. I'm going to speak about community engagement in higher education, and my presentation will have 4 parts. I will first give an introduction, some introductory reflections about the relationship between higher education and society and the roles that higher education should play in society. I will argue why the concept of community engagement should be a central concept in our understanding of what roles higher education play in society. And I will then highlight some of the challenges that exist in pushing this agenda forwards and how policy could intervene to push this agenda forwards as well. So, higher education institutions, universities, obviously a central part and an integral part of the societies that we live in. And universities always have had and always will have a large impact on our societies. But there is a difference between having an impact on society and engaging with society. So a university, by being located in a certain place, will impact that society by having graduates enter that society, by creating jobs in that area, and by having research that then has ripple effects on society, usually positive, but not necessarily. But the question is then, how can we make sure that universities actively contribute to addressing the societal needs that we're facing? This isn't actually a new question at all, and in fact, this idea that higher education institutions really focus only on 2 things, and that's teaching and research, and that a lot of that teaching and research is maybe overly theoretical and somehow disconnected from the real world and from our needs as societies, is quite an old one, and it's encapsulated in the metaphor of the university as the ivory tower, with highly intellectualized, somehow separated from society. Now, as a reaction to that, and that's been going on for decades, as a reaction to that, there's been the emergence of policies and a policy shift which is trying to steer universities towards being more connected to society and connecting their teaching and research to society. And as you may know, this has been called the 3rd mission of higher education, after teaching and research. Now, there's 2 problems with the 3rd mission of higher education. The first is the name itself. So many would argue that it should not be called the 3rd mission of higher education, because that somehow implies that it's less important than the first 2. So it's an additional, optional one that you can do after you finish the real mission of higher education, which is teaching and research. And the other challenge is that it actually should be looking more like this. So it should be an interaction constant between teaching and research between research and society, and teaching and society. But that's not really the case. So it should not be called the 3rd mission. Maybe it should be called the 1st mission of higher education. Maybe that's what universities should be for. Now, the second problem that we have with this discussion about the 3rd mission of higher education is that in practice, that discussion very quickly becomes a discussion about universities and the economy. So universities as driving the knowledge economy, as having technological innovations. Maybe you see all these buzzwords a lot in your own work, so triple helix cooperation with industry, etc. And there's no doubt that all of this is very important, and that all of those things do and can and often do have very positive impacts on society as a whole. But that's only part of the picture. And the fact is that there really is a need to rebalance the debate about the societal role and contributions of higher education, Because there are so many other challenges that we're facing. We don't just need technological innovation, we need social innovation. We don't just need economic development, we need social development. And there are so many other challenges that we're facing as societies, and we should be dealing with them as an integral part of this third mission of higher education, and not as an afterthought in the third mission of higher education. And what I'd like to argue in this Hed Talk is that the idea of and the concept of community engagement can be a new way in which we can frame this debate about the societal role of universities. Now, it's possible that, we come from different countries, and it's possible that your first reaction to hearing the term community engagement would be that it's necessarily something very localized about the university and its neighborhood and the civil society surrounding universities. And that is a crucial part of community engagement. But I think it's useful to think of community engagement as something much broader. And one way of defining community engagement, it's about how universities address societal need in partnership with their communities, whereby communities, we can really extend that definition much more broadly. So it can be with government, with local authorities, with business, with civil society, with citizens. But also, it doesn't just have to be a localized thing, it can be at the global level as well. The second part of the definition of community engagement is the term engagement itself, where it should really be about finding mutual benefits in those partnerships. So we need to move away from this discussion of the university helping others, and as being this kind of well-resourced knowledge hub that can help others with those resources, but rather how can both sides benefit? How can researchers benefit, teachers benefit, but also the other side as well? Now, this discussion is a broad one, and you may have come across very different terms to hear about when we speak in this area. So it could be knowledge exchange, civic engagement, regional engagement, public engagement, societal responsibility of universities, and so on. Now, I may be slightly oversimplifying it, but what I would actually propose is that we are very much talking about the same thing in all these areas. So it's always about how the university interacts with society, and in my opinion, it's useful to have an umbrella term such as community engagement that could maybe encompass all of these. Now, what does community engagement mean in practice for a university? What we've done in a project that I've been leading called Towards a European Framework for Community Engagement in Higher Education is to try and think in practice about what are the various dimensions of community engagement at a university. And we've come up with 7 different dimensions. But in short, it's about, again, it's not about an additional activity that should be carried out by the university. It's about embedding community engagement into existing activities of the university. So let me just go through these 7 dimensions to give some illustrations. So in teaching and learning, a typical way of community engagement is by providing service learning, community-based learning or project-based learning at university. So that allows students, so it's credit-bearing courses at university that allow students, in addition to classroom instruction, to go out into the communities, work with other organizations, gain credits for that, but also ensure that the other side has some benefit in that partnership. In research, it's not just about doing research about external communities, it's doing research with them, so including communities in the research agenda setting. And this can happen in all fields of science. It's not just something in the social sciences. So in the natural sciences, you have citizen science. In health and social care, you have patient and public involvement. There's many different ways across the university how you can do this. Service and knowledge exchange, that does refer to these extra activities that academic staff would do in addition to their core research, but that's applying their knowledge in other real-world situations. So through projects to build capacity of community groups, getting involved in public debates, in policy consultations. Students, often ignored, by the way, in this discussion about community engagement. Students themselves are key players in community engagement. They come up with their own ideas of how they can volunteer in the community, how they could maybe do some student activisms to make something change in the communities that they live in. And management, we have 2 dimensions related to the management of the university. And the first is actually ensuring that the space of the university is open to the community. The resources can be used by the community as well. And the second one is about how the university is managed itself, so that there's actually structures that encourage staff and students to be more engaged. Finally, supportive peers, that's the most abstract one, and it's about to what extent do academics and professional staff at the university share the view that this is a worthwhile mission, or is there some resistance to this idea that this maybe isn't good teaching or robust science? Okay, but maybe in some universities there is a strong support, maybe in others there's not such a strong support. So, before I go to challenges, maybe if we look back at this, many of you might be thinking, okay, but universities already have so much to do. Is it really realistic to expect that they're going to be doing all of this in addition to what we're supposed to do now? We have so many other pressures. Now, there's two answers to that question. The first is that universities are already doing this around the world. Universities around the world are already doing this. It's just a lot of it is not visible. And the other thing is that they're doing it not because there's some incentive to do it or because there's some policy pressure, but because they're intrinsically motivated to do this. They believe that this is a good way of doing teaching, a good way of doing research. Now, the second answer to the question of, isn't this a bit too much, is we wouldn't expect every single academic and every single student to be community engaged. It's about ensuring that those that are community engaged get the proper recognition for the value of what they're doing, the value for the university and value for society. So we're not saying everyone from tomorrow should be obliged to be community engaged. It's just saying that those that are doing something that's equally valuable to getting a high impact factor article published. Okay. So what are the challenges? The challenges are numerous, and I'm sure that this slide won't surprise anyone. The main reason why this isn't something more prominent in higher education is there are so many other pressures on higher education to prioritize other things. So there's public funding issues, there's increased steering of universities through performance-based funding to do other things, and that community engagement is not one of those. Global rankings are pushing university managers to really prioritize those areas that will increase their performance. Even within the third mission, you're more likely to go for the project that's going to bring in, technology transfer and funds for the university than for the one that's for the public good in society. And obviously, for each academic, you've got to publish. That's what you have to do. And community engagement takes time and it takes resources. Second challenge, more of an internal challenge, is that let's say that you're a vice chancellor and you really want to prioritize community engagement. That's not easy either. There is so many different types of community engagement. It's very difficult to coordinate. It's very difficult to find data on what's happening, and you might also face resistance to change from inside the university. And in particular, then we have the challenge of measurement, because let's say tomorrow we would say that community engagement becomes a high priority. The first question is going to be, how do you measure it? Okay? And it's notoriously difficult to measure. People have tried to find metrics for community engagement. It doesn't work. So why? Because it's so context-specific. If you're a university in Barcelona, it will be your engagement with society in such a large city will be completely different to a university in a smaller rural area of Catalonia, or let alone somewhere else in Europe. So geography, your environment, what disciplines, what's the mission of that university, is completely going to define how that university is engaged. So you can't compare universities' engagement. You have to take each one as a context-specific area. So, how do we deal with that issue? We have come up with an idea, I'm not going to say the solution, but an idea of how we could deal with this challenge. So we've come up with a framework called the TEFC Toolbox, which we have subtitled an Institutional Self-Reflection Framework for Community Engagement in Higher Education, which allows universities to examine their community engagement according to these 7 dimensions. It offers a structure to think critically about how well we are engaged, how authentic is our engagement, and it allows you then to identify areas for improvement. And it's, again, it's not a desk-based exercise for someone in an office. It's a participative discussion with the university and with the community. It's inspired by things that have already existed, but we feel that we've gone a bit further in this. And after mapping your community engagement, having discussions and critically reflecting on what you're doing, you end up with what we call the heat map for community engagement, which then allows you to identify areas where you're strong, where you have good engagement, where you have engaged with diversity of different actors, and areas where you could really be improving and doing more. As a slight joke here, so this, what we've done here is to really it's the compromise between the qualitative approach and our need as human beings to pigeonhole things and to give them scores and colors. We just decided to go for an option that wouldn't actually give you a score per se, that wouldn't allow you to compare yourself and rank yourself next to someone else, but it does allow you to synthesize very complex data that's qualitative in something where you can clearly see this is where we're doing well, this is where we should probably improve. Okay, so how can policy push this agenda forwards? The good news is that I think there is hope in this area, and there is an increasing, especially in the last decade, increasing amount of discussion about the broader role of society, of universities in society that goes beyond this purely economic one. So the SDGs have played a key role in this. I'm working in the European context, so looking at the language used in the European Commission, this is changing as well. So they're referring more to societal challenges. They've used the word civic universities for the first time in a policy document in 2018. They've now come up with their own idea of universities' service to society as the fourth mission of higher education. This came straight from the Commission, didn't exist before as a concept, but it's great that they came up with it. So this is really changing, so that I feel there is space for this to improve in the next decade. What should policymakers do? They should include community engagement among policy priorities, making a clear distinction between this innovation and business engagement on the one hand, and then this other, let's call it service to society. Why not? That would be the first step. The second step, you need to support the objective, build capacities, provide recognition at universities for this kind of work, and more incentives. And thirdly, yes, avoid approaches that would just simplify this in a kind of, okay, let's see how many public lectures you have a year as a measure of your community engagement. We have to avoid those issues, and we need to go in more qualitative directions. What if that doesn't work? What if the policymakers don't listen to this? Well, we'll just continue what we've done so far, which is bottom up. And there is so much work being done at the global level in this area that it's very inspiring. So these are networks which we're really happy to have been also engaged with and participating. The Talwa Network of Engaged Universities, the UNESCO Chair for Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education, who've been very prominent at this conference, GUNI, who are the co-organizers of this conference. They are all connecting universities and academics and students to think about how universities can be better connected to society and be more community engaged. At the national level, there's been inspiring work. In the US, they have their own, let's say, centers that help universities be more community engaged. Same thing in the UK and in Ireland. So there's a range of inspiring practices that we can look towards, and we can continue doing that work without necessarily having a policy to support it. So my conclusion of my Hed Talk would be that university and community engagement in universities will continue even if there's no policy support for it. So there's no doubt about that. It would be nice, however, if we're thinking about the future of higher education. I mean, can we imagine that there is going to be a scenario in which universities are open, responsive to society, and get the resources and the support to do so? That would ensure that universities manage to have a much better contact with society, much more societal impact, and through partnerships with communities. And I think that's a vision that we can all look forward to. That's the end. Thank you very much for your attention. I would be happy to answer any questions. If not, I could be happy to ask you questions about whether in your own context you've recognized this tension between that third mission going towards business engagement and industry and tech transfer, to, on the other side, this more community, let's say, engagement. So I'd be very happy to hear either questions or your own reflection on this topic. I'm not sure. Is it working, the microphone? Okay, thank you.
Yes, it does.
Thanks.
First of all, there's a network missing on your list. It's the Living Knowledge Network, the network of sign shops.
It is. It is. It was not a comprehensive list, but yes, I completely.
I had to drop this now. There is a lot I could say now to what you presented here. It's excellent. It's really straightforward. It's our direction, what we've been working for more than 20 years in the sign shop activities. But some aspects I learned throughout these years and are still, let me say, disappointing. Mm-hmm. Also listening to presentations here at this conference. Because you see, what you described as this inner resistance to change, it's still there. I was evaluator for Horizon Europe projects right now. It was a citizen science-oriented call for monitoring environmental data with a strong focus on open science. So what did these consortia understand as open science in this context is publishing data,
right. Yeah.
Making data available. Yeah. But if you look at the open science definition from UNESCO, recently published, it's open education, it's citizen science, it's engaging with society, and this still doesn't happen. So what happens is we read this new concept, but we somehow try to form it that we don't have to change anything. Yeah, so and this is I think what we have to address in the future, that there is an opportunity to change something if you dare to. There was another, I'm sorry if somebody else wants to talk. Sure. There was another aspect this morning for the presentation of the report on sustainable development goals, higher education and sustainable development goals. And one of the quotes was, there's a need within universities to sustain themselves, yeah, so somehow get the money. But what they do is sustaining the state of the art. Yeah, so they're just thinking, how can we keep? We have to bring in money. We have to stay in the global ranking, what you have described. But it's the state of the art. If you see a university as a company, so they have to lose, yeah, because they are not innovative. They are not moving forward. And I think this mind shift we should be working for, so that you have to see the opportunities in changing the way how higher education, so I'm not from a higher education institute, so I'm looking at it from outside. But this kind of overcoming this, how Bud Hall said this morning, this 500-year-old tradition to absorb any kind of changes. Yeah, so I think this is what we have to work on. And I think with this paper, with these projects we are running, I think we are on a good way. And what I at least can see, that there are scattered activities in single universities across Europe, across the world, that these things happen, but there are more universities than we have at the moment. So it took us 20 years to get this point. Probably I won't see the next 20 years because I'm too old for that, but I'm optimistic that changes happen, that change happens. But let's think how we can put this into practice, what you have put on here. So thank you very much for this
thank you.
Presentation and the work you do in the TEFCHE project.
Thank you for your comments. And look, I completely agree with you. I mean, first of all, yes, living knowledge should have been up here. But actually, I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, even though sometimes there's no reason to be. But I believe that any small change that pushes things forward, so that even the fact that open science is in that call means it's a step forward. The fact that people haven't understood it or simplifying it in a way that's really that's not at all in line with what it was supposed to be, which is including people in science and not just making it open access, right? I agree, but I think, yes, that every small shift that we're seeing, including using the word service to society in a commission document, which isn't actually backed up with any funds yet, but at least it's entered the discussion. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we are going in the right direction. Yes, I agree, yeah.
Training for communities, also training for researchers, and training on the management level of universities and governments.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Anyone else would like to...
Yes.
It's an informal chat, we don't need to be too... yeah. Hi.
Thomas, thank you very much. This was fantastic. And your comments, sir, also. Thank you very much. That is exactly what is happening and what we need really to change. I have actually written on the effect of rankings on sustainable development and how irrelevant they are to community engagement, to social justice, to environmental sustainability. And I do agree with you completely on the point that you made that there is bottom-up kind of activity that is trying to change, but it is not permeating. You know, it's not translating into policy. And I think that is what we need to change. That is where we need to, you said, you know, the word community engagement is now entering the policy little by little. So that is something that we really need to work on in order to have also that other side of top-down kind of effect of policy on practice. Yes, there is a need for educating many people inside the university to understand that it is really important for them to engage with community, and that we shouldn't be gatekeeping. But the question is, can we really, for once and for all, say no to rankings and replace them with another sort of understanding of higher education in which we can include community engagement? That is what I really want to see. What is your idea about that?
I mean, that's a great question. I fear not. I don't think that, I was speaking earlier as a joke of our need to kind of, rankings fulfill a need that we have for kind of metrics and kind of, you know, Rotten Tomato scores for films. Like, it helps us to kind of guide our decisions. So I'm afraid that that's not going to change. And we've had interesting discussions about what would happen if there was a ranking for community engagement, which is almost what's happening with Times Higher Education. But let's say that community engagement became a part of rankings. Would that be good or not? I mean, it would. I would not like to see that. But on the other hand, maybe it would encourage certain, changes of behaviours. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Hank. But I think that that's. I fear that it's not going to change, and then it's that dilemma about whether to go for rankings or not. Our stance in this project is that there wouldn't be any value of doing that, and therefore let's try and push for this qualitative approach. But I think that's quite idealistic.
For us to change rankings and include and have another way of ranking for community engagement.
No, you went all together, yeah.
With rankings, just put them away because they're not relevant in higher education, and then create another way of understanding higher education, including, for example, the quantitative way of their community engagement. You see, because rankings are not making any sense in the era of sustainable development.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree with that, and I think that what we've come up with here is an idea to go in that direction where you could have peer learning between institutions, understanding that their own context-specific differences are not to be compared but just to be understood. But at the level of global rankings, I can't see them going away that quickly, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'd like to give a testimony of what happens when we include social engagement in evaluation or rankings.
Okay.
This is what happened in Brazil, where I came from and I teach at. But when I was a doctorate student, the program where I was going, it was evaluated, and the rank they gave us, it was a little lower we think we deserve. Mm-hmm. And the answer was, we couldn't evaluate your social engagement. And people, what? It's an important program. We are everywhere in social, in civil society and ONGs, and we do many things. No, it's because you don't have a website. We don't like your website. It's not good enough. And no, but that's not social engagement. We do this. Well, so help us. They said help us to evaluate what is social engagement. And so was done, but it wasn't enough, because when you have an object, when you have a measure of what is social engagement, it already becomes social disengagement in a way, because engagement is a living process. It creates process that already doesn't exist already, and so. Somehow, in the institution where I teach at, we have the same problem, is that we are evaluated and doing extension programs or acting in society. It has how to say, it counts for our evaluation, but less than research, obviously, less than teaching. And it ends up that people do less. That it's too much dedication to less bonuses.
Sure. But can I ask you? So, but at the end of the day, do you still think that system is good in the sense that it's still validating and recognizing that as an important part of what universities in Brazil are supposed to do? Or do you think that it's just because they've got these sets of indicators that are too narrow, and you think that they should just broaden it up and make it more, discussion-based or qualitative?
Well, what I think is when we start to evaluate, we start to make it harder, the process. And they are evaluating because they think they should do this. It came to us like a policy, international policy. You got to social engage. University can be an island in society, but it was already not an island. The process that makes a university an island is not lack of evaluation or lack of measure. It's other process, economically and cultural, political, ideological, are many things, but not because people are not talking about social engagement.
Sure, thank you. That's a really valuable. Brazil is a great example of a country that's pushed a lot forwards there. But even it was interesting to hear that even in a case where it's in policy, it's at the university kind of, it's something that universities should be doing. It's still it's very hard to find a good way of evaluating it without it kind of, in a way, damaging the engagement process. So thank you. That's really valuable. Any other comments? Yes.
No other comment?
Sure, come in.
In addition to what you said, do we need...
Should we have the microphone? Sorry, I'm just...
In addition to what you said, do we need a new understanding of excellence? Yeah?
I think so. I think so.
Thinking about that. And also to give you some examples, opening of the 6th framework program, the president of Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft answered to the question, what about the science and society plan of the European Union, which was quite new at that time, and he said, get away, so we're doing excellence, and politicians and citizens keep out of that process. Okay. Now they support, at least at a small scale, open science. So there's hope. Same for Bonn University. When we started the Science Shop to be a linkage or a connection point for societal needs and research, they said, go away, you're left-winged, long-haired students. Now they have 4 or 5 excellence clusters, and they start a service learning program. So I really can support your thesis that there's hope. It takes its time, but there's hope. But I really think we need a new understanding of excellence, because serving society, serving societal needs is, for me, is a matter of excellence. It's not just the number of publications and the ranking within the global university system.
Thank you. I mean, I would just reflect, based on that, I don't know if anyone from the UK would disagree with me because it's a bit of a contentious topic, but there's the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, which was developed as a new way of assessing research. And I think together with Australia, it's one of the first ones that's really putting a lot more emphasis on societal impact as one key element and quite important element of the research assessment. And how do they measure that? They measure that through actual testimonies of how you engaged the public in your research. So I think those kinds of examples, I think many people would disagree that it's a good practice. I think people in the UK have a problem with the REF, but I think it's an example of how heavy structures related to research assessment, which have not changed for a long time, can actually change in a direction which is much more productive, such as this one, which accepts that as a core part of excellence is societal impact. So I think there is hope, as you said.
Yes, but there were too many backlashes from Ted and the left.
Yeah.
At the time when they were introduced. So
No, I know it's not a clear-cut picture, but in this case it serves my argument well, so I'm going to use it. There's one more. Are we done? I think we're done. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and look forward to our ongoing discussions. Thank you.